morning, Rochester. Thank you all so much for being tuned into today's chapel. This morning, you and I are going to get a chance to hear from a very special guest speaker, none other than Abdu Murray. He's one of the leading voices in apologetics. He's an international itinerant speaker, as well as the senior vice president for Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. He's authored 4 books, including his most recent title that he co-wrote with the late Ravi Zacharias, Seeing Jesus from the East, a fresh look at history's most influential figure. Abdu received his BA in psychology from the University of Michigan, as well as his JD from the University of Michigan's Law School. You can hear Abdu speak and host the Defense Rests, his podcast. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find, subscribe to it, and hear him speak there as well. I want to encourage you, check him out online. You can hear many of his sessions and presentations that are available on YouTube. He and his wife, their 3 children, live right here in the Detroit area. Whether you're watching live or you're going to be viewing later, this might be a message that you want to pass along to a friend. So like, share, comment, be blessed by this message. In Rochester, let's virtually welcome our guest speaker, none other than Abdu Murray.
Hello, students of Rochester University. It's a joy to be with you, even if digitally, right now for this particular chapel service. We have a short time together, about 15 minutes, and I want to spend some time talking with you about a bit of a heady topic and one that's specifically and very poignantly culturally relevant for each one of us, especially those of you who are at the age you're at university. In our culture today, there's something going on that's very important for us to address. And what I hope to show by the time we're done, in the very short time we have, is that Jesus, the person of Jesus, and in fact the teaching of Jesus, are applicable today to the very culture we find ourselves in today, proving that Jesus will be shown to be our eternal contemporary, to quote Leslie Newbigin. And what does it mean for him to be our eternal contemporary? It means that though Jesus is this ancient Easterner, having hailed from the Middle East, the part of the world where my family comes from, that it seems like maybe he is pertaining to that particular culture at that particular time. But by the time we're through in our time together, what I'm hoping to show is that this seemingly parochial Easterner from a obscure outpost of the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago actually speaks to the very issues we're dealing with now in our contemporary culture. And that's what makes him our eternal contemporary. He is always and perpetually relevant. So the cultural phenomenon I want to speak to you about today is the cancel culture. And many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Most likely, you're very well versed in what the cancel culture is all about. But by way of primer, when we think of the cancel culture, what this is, it's a culture in which we no longer debate ideas, controversial ideas especially, or those ideas we disagree with, those ideas that tend to go against the socially accepted or politically correct norms. Now we don't do that anymore. What we do is we engage in cancellation, is that if someone happens to say something that runs afoul of that which we have culturally approved, we will no longer ask them, what is the basis for your claim? What is the evidence you have? Let me hear your argument and let me listen to what you have to say. We don't do that anymore. We used to do that when we used to have a civil public square. But nowadays we're engaging in the gladiatorial fights similar to the Roman Colosseum, where our champion gets up and vanquishes the other person, whether you're a conservative or a liberal. If you're a conservative, you share the videos where thus and such famous conservative destroys or owns thus and such famous liberal. Or if you're a liberal, the other way around. And we don't engage in actual dialogue. What we engage in is gladiatorial fights. And if someone happens to say something that we don't like, we cancel them. So if you're a famous author, we stop buying your books. If you're a famous actor, we stop going to your movies. If you're a famous athlete, we stop buying your shoes or stop buying your jerseys. Whatever it takes, we stop following you on social media. And then we start to shame people. We actually use vitriolic language, the most bile-laden language we could think of, to silence somebody because their opinion, whether it's true or not, happens to be disfavored or happens to be something that we find unpalatable. So we don't engage in argument, we engage in shaming. This happens all the time. Now, it's interesting is that you look at some of the most popular public figures of our day, and I could name dozens for you, and you already know them. But I'm thinking of one in particular. Her name is J.K. Rowling. Now, J.K. Rowling is known to many of you as the author of the popular series of books, the Harry Potter series of books, which sold millions upon millions. I believe the number is something like 500 million copies of these books. And of course, movies were made out of these books. And she has a massive fortune based on her literary works. Well, J.K. Rowling is politically and socially, in terms of her beliefs, left of center. She has relatively liberal views on a lot of things. But she also is a very firm advocate for women who have been abused. And she's trying to end women's abuse and these kind of things, whether mental or physical. Now, part of her platform, in order to end the abuse of women, is to actually make a distinction between men and women. That gender, in her view, is not a social construct. There's actually a thing called male and actually a thing called female, and the fluidity that the culture's suggesting is there really isn't there. And to suggest that it is undermines the plight of women. Well, that of course went against the socially accepted norm that gender is a construct or is a fluid concept. And so she got canceled. People who were her biggest fans, those who loved her works and loved the things she had said before that, suddenly were calling for her cancellation. Stop reading her books, stop watching those movies. Even some of the actors, I'm given to understand, who were involved in the very movies that were based on her books, they were distancing themselves from J.K. Rowling. And of course, she got death threats, she got horrible vitriol poured upon her, all because of her statement, her belief in one particular thing. No one wanted to go to debate the issues, no one wanted to go into the science on the issues, they just simply wanted to silence her and shut her up. They wanted to shame her out of existence. That's the essence of the cancel culture. Now, what's interesting about this is that she and a bunch of other public intellectuals actually wrote a letter that was published in Harper's, I believe it was, and it was calling for the end of the cancel culture and the birth, or I shouldn't say the birth, but the resurgence of free speech, even unpopular speech. And there was dozens and dozens of signatories to this document. Well, they interviewed one such signatory, another journalist or another writer, and they said, by the way, did you know that J.K. Rowling signed this document as well? Now, this person who agreed with everything the document had to say about free speech and the perils of the cancel culture said, oh my goodness, J.K. Rowling signed it? Take my name off. They wanted their name off of a document they agreed to. They agreed to every single thing in substance about this document, but they wanted their name removed. That's fascinating because it wasn't the substance of the claims or of the position that they found objectionable. It was the kind of person who happened to agree with them that they found objectionable. And because they wanted to cancel that person, they removed their name from a document they actually agreed with. In other words, the irony is so thick you can cut it with a knife. They wanted to cancel the document they agreed would cancel the cancel culture. That's how strong this idea of shaming someone out of their opinions really is in our day. Now, that might seem like a modern invention, but I can assure you it's not. This idea of shaming people or bringing honor to people based on their statuses is a very Eastern idea. It's a very old idea. My people, the people from the Middle East, we invented it and we gifted it to you. You're very welcome. This is an import from the Middle East and other parts of the world. See, the Middle East is what's called an honor-shame culture. Jesus grew up, did his ministry, died and rose again in an honor and shame culture. And this is what an honor and shame culture is. An honor and shame culture is one that enforces morality from external sources. In other words, we in the West tend to think of morality as being enforced from within. If I do something wrong, it goes against the socially accepted norms or some social rule, I feel this inner sense of conscience that makes me want to fix it. So I go and I fix it. I either make amends to the person I've wronged or I confess my sin, whatever it might be. I have an individualistic reaction of conscience because we are extremely individualistic in the modern West. In the East, it's more communal. Morality is enforced from outside, is that what I do what I do in the East based on the desire to have communal honor and the desire to avoid communal shame. So what I do affects other people, and what I believe affects other people. So I will do that which brings honor to my family, and then brings honor to the community, and then brings honor to the nation. But I'll also avoid that which brings shame to the family and brings shame to the community. Now you can see there's positives and negatives to this kind of a thing, is that you pursue that which helps other people. But the negative to it is that oftentimes if you're confronted with the truth in an honor and shame culture, you won't accept it, even when you know it's the truth, because you know people around you will disapprove and they will shame you and exclude you from the community. That's an ancient Eastern way of doing things. But look out now, because the modern Western cancel culture is simply the social media version of exactly what's been going on in the Middle East for thousands and thousands of years. So maybe we ought to pay attention to history's most influential figure, the person of Jesus, who happens to have lived and did his ministry in a cancel culture 2,000 years ago, and might offer us some wisdom on how to navigate the waters in our world today. Think about all the conversations Jesus has. When he's having these conversations that are public, the people who are asking him public questions aren't really asking him questions for information. They're asking him to embarrass him and to get rid of the influence that he has in the crowd and increase their influence. Think now about the cesspool of interaction that Twitter has become, where people don't actually ask questions for an answer. They ask questions to embarrass those who might try to interact with them so they can get the honor points. That's an old system of doing things that happened to Jesus. But people who ask questions in private, that's different. They really want an answer. And Jesus had encounters with people in private where he gave them transformational truths that allowed them the courage to rise above the honor and shame system that tried to shut them down, because he bestowed on them something far greater than the culture could ever do it. Let me give you an example. Many of you are familiar with the parable, not the parable, it's actually a story of an account of Jesus encountering somebody in John chapter 9. It's a man who was born blind, a young man who's born blind. And this man has had to beg his whole life for his living, and he lives with his parents, but he's had to beg his whole life for a living and this kind of thing. Well, Jesus comes across him, and he heals the man, and he heals the man of his blindness on a Sabbath day. And the Pharisees, because they're extremely legalistic, take issue with this. They don't want Jesus to heal a guy on the Sabbath day, and they're looking for a way to show that Jesus doesn't follow the law, that he's some kind of a fraud. And Jesus knows this, so he intentionally does these things to make trouble, basically. Well, the Pharisees already said something to the people. They said this: whoever confesses Jesus to be the Savior, to be the Messiah, will be put out of the synagogue. In other words, they can no longer go to the central part of the community. In other words, they will be canceled. Tremendous amount of pressure on the people to disavow Jesus as the Messiah. But here's this young man who's now been healed of his blindness. What choice does he have now but to testify to the miracle that's happened to him through Jesus? And he does it. But the Pharisees are angry now, and they come over to the young man's parents. And they say to the young man's parents, "Is this really your son who you say was born blind?" In other words, they think a scam is afoot. They think that he wasn't really born blind, and they've been lying about it this whole time so that he can fake an illness so he can get handouts and charity for his illness or for his ailment. And of course, they don't want to be blamed for that kind of thing. They say, no. The parents say, no, we know this is our son. We know he was born blind, but how he now sees, we do not know. That's a lie. Of course they know. You think their son didn't tell them? He was telling everybody else who healed him. But because, the scripture says it, because of their fear of being put out of the synagogue by the authority of the Pharisees, they did not want to be canceled. They did not want to be shamed. So they basically said, we don't know who did it. And they say, in fact, ask our son, he is of age. Why did they say that? They probably said that because the young man was barely of the age of accountability. He was barely a man. In other words, he was barely 14 years old, because the age of adulthood in those days was 13 for a Jewish man. So they threw their teenage son to the wolves because they did not want to be canceled. But their teenage son, standing up and brashly says, "This is the man who healed me." And he's a little bit snarky with the Pharisees. And what do? They cancel him. They put him out of the synagogue. They gave to him the ultimate social sanction. They absolutely devastated the young man socially. They canceled him. And many of you probably faced a similar thing for your views. Or you know someone who has. And it can be devastating. But Jesus' honor and shame radar pings, and he goes up to the young man and he says, I have come after the young man the cheap cultural honor bestowed upon you by hypocrites with the eternal heavenly honor only the Son of God can bestow upon you. You are not canceled. You are a child of God, made in his image, and God has brought me, the Messiah, Jesus, to you to redeem you. He includes him in a community that cannot be taken from him. That's how Jesus speaks to our culture today. I'm reminded of the hymn by Isaac Watts. The Lord is just and kind, the meek shall learn his ways, and every humble sinner find the methods of his grace. For his own goodness' sake, he saves my soul from shame. He pardons though my guilt be great, through my Redeemer's name. Jesus cancels that cancel culture that you and I are having to live with right now, and he offers you a hope that only he can give. May you know that hope. May you know that inclusion of community through your Savior, who for his own goodness' sake saves your soul and my soul from shame. God bless you.